It was close to midnight when I hit the road, the dark stretch of highway looming ahead like an endless void. I'd been at a friend's place, and the party had gone on longer than expected. Now, I just wanted to get home, crawl into bed, and forget how exhausted I felt. But as soon as I merged onto the highway, something strange settled over me. A sense that something was off. The road was deserted, and the farther I drove, the darker it seemed to get. My headlights cast eerie shadows on the trees lining the road, their twisted branches clawing at the night sky. I'd driven this highway countless times, but tonight, it felt like I was driving into something sinister. There was no moon, no stars, just the two beams of light slicing through the darkness. After a few miles, I realized the silence was absolute. My car radio was off, but it wasn't just that. There were no sounds from the outside world either. No distant hum of other cars, no wind, no chirping of night creatures. Just the dull hum of my engine. I tried turning on the radio, but all I got was static. Odd, I thought, but then again it was the middle of nowhere. I settled back into the drive, eyes glued to the road, when suddenly, a chill ran down my spine. Something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. A shadow, faint and flickering, but unmistakable. It was the silhouette of a person sitting in the back seat. My heart skipped a beat, and I whipped my head around, but there was no one there. The back seat was empty, save for a few old receipts and my gym bag. I laughed it off nervously, chalking it up to my imagination. Long drive, late night. Anyone would be seeing things. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept checking the mirror, and every so often, there it was again, that shadow flickering in and out, always in the same spot in the back seat. It was as if someone was just sitting there, watching me. I turned up the heat, though I was already sweating, telling myself that if I just kept going, I'd be fine. But my hands were trembling, and my skin prickled with a cold sweat. About 20 minutes later, the highway took a sharp bend, and as I rounded the corner, I noticed something on the side of the road. There, standing just beyond the reach of my headlights, was a woman. She was pale, almost ghostly, dressed in a long, tattered white dress that fluttered in a non-existent breeze. Her face was obscured by her long, dark hair, and she stood completely still, facing my car. I slowed down instinctively, unsure of what to do. It was the middle of nowhere, and there was no reason for anyone to be out here alone at this hour. I debated stopping, asking if she needed help, but something in my gut told me to keep going. I inched forward, watching her out of the corner of my eye. Her head slowly tilted up, and her eyes locked onto mine, wide and unblinking. They were the darkest eyes I'd ever seen, black, empty, almost soulless. As I sped up, she seemed to watch me leave, her figure disappearing in the rearview mirror as I drove faster. But then I felt it again, that icy feeling, the sensation that I wasn't alone. I glanced back at the mirror, and this time my blood ran cold. The woman was now sitting in my back seat. Her face was obscured by that tangled hair, but I could feel her gaze, heavy and chilling, piercing through me. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white, and kept my eyes on the road, refusing to look back again. I wanted to pull over, to jump out of the car and run, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. I kept my foot pressed to the gas, praying I'd wake up from this nightmare. Then she started whispering. At first, it was barely audible, just a faint murmur, like a breeze slipping through the cracks. But as the minutes passed, her voice grew louder, a rasping whisper that filled the car. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone sent chills down my spine. It was angry, desperate, like she was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand. I tried to drown it out, humming, turning on the radio again, anything to block out the sound, but her voice seeped through, relentless, like it was inside my head. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I swerved the car onto the side of the road, my heart pounding in my chest. I took a deep breath, turned around, and braced myself. But she was gone. The back seat was empty, the car silent. I let out a shaky breath, laughing nervously. Had I imagined the whole thing? Maybe it was just exhaustion playing tricks on me. I glanced at the road, trying to calm down before continuing, when I heard it. A faint scratching sound, like nails against metal. I looked over at the passenger window. She was there, her face pressed against the glass, eyes wide and filled with fury. Her mouth twisted into a terrible grin, revealing rows of sharp, blackened teeth. She mouthed something I couldn't hear, her fingers clawing against the window, leaving streaks of black where her nails dragged across the glass. I slammed on the gas and sped off, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The road seemed endless, stretching on forever, the darkness growing deeper, the air inside the car thick and suffocating. The scratching continued, growing louder, filling my ears, until I could hardly think. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The road opened up ahead, and I saw lights in the distance. I'd made it back to civilization. I breathed a sigh of relief, the tension slowly ebbing from my body. The lights grew brighter, and soon I found myself driving through the outskirts of my town, familiar buildings lining the street. I pulled into my driveway, heart still racing, and jumped out of the car, desperate to get inside. But as I turned to close the car door, I froze. There, in the back seat, was a single dark handprint. It was smeared against the window, fingers stretched wide, the glass fogged with a faint breath mark. And beneath it, written in dripping black letters, was a single word: soon. To this day, I'm haunted by that night, and I refuse to drive that stretch of highway after dark. I don't know who or what she was, but every now and then, I wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, feeling that same chill, that same sensation of being watched. And sometimes, just sometimes, I catch a glimpse of her in the shadows, watching and waiting, her dark eyes burning into me, her mouth twisted in that same terrible grin. The clock on the dashboard read 1:42 a.m., and I was still miles from home, driving down a deserted road that stretched endlessly through fields and patches of forest. The only light was from my headlights, casting eerie shadows that made the trees look like twisted fingers reaching out to grab anything that strayed too close. I'd been driving for hours without seeing another car or even a distant farmhouse light, as if the world had gone to sleep and left me alone. Then, I noticed something strange, a set of taillights far ahead, barely visible in the darkness. Relieved to see another soul, I sped up a little, hoping to catch up, but as I got closer, I realized the car was old and moving at a painfully slow pace. The taillights glowed a dull red, barely cutting through the dark. I thought about passing, but something told me not to. The car seemed too strange, too out of place, so I kept my distance, hoping it would speed up or pull off the road. But then the lights blinked out. For a moment, I thought the car had stopped, but when I drew closer, I realized there was nothing there. No car, no taillights, just an empty road. My heart skipped a beat. There was nowhere for a car to have turned off. The fields and forest on either side were flat and open. I shook it off, assuming my tired eyes were playing tricks, but the unease began to settle in. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see something behind me, but it was always the same dark road stretching endlessly into the night. Then I saw them, figures standing just off the side of the road. At first, I thought they were people, maybe hitchhikers or travelers, but as I got closer, I realized they weren't moving. Their faces were shrouded in shadow, barely illuminated by my headlights. I slowed down, squinting to get a better look, but their eyes reflected the light, glinting like animal eyes in the night. Their posture was stiff, unnatural, like they had been frozen in place. As I passed, more figures appeared, lining the road on both sides, inching closer and closer until they were nearly close enough to touch my car. My grip on the wheel tightened, and I didn't dare slow down or look at them. Then, I noticed something worse. In the rearview mirror, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road behind me, closer than the others, right where I just passed. It looked like me. Same height, same build, same clothes, standing in the exact spot I'd been a second ago, staring back at me through the mirror. Panic set in and I floored the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, and I felt a surge of relief as the figures faded into the distance. But the road ahead grew darker, stretching into a tunnel of shadows, and the figures appeared in front of me, always there, watching, waiting. Then I felt it, a presence in the car with me. The air grew heavy, and I could hear faint, raspy breathing coming from the back seat. I didn't want to look. Every instinct told me not to, but the breathing grew louder, hot breath on my neck. Heart racing, I glanced in the rearview mirror. There was a figure in the back seat, sitting impossibly still, wearing the same clothes I did. Same shirt, same small rip in the sleeve, but its face was wrong. Pale, sunken, and smiling with a wide, empty grin. I snapped my eyes back to the road, my hands white-knuckling the wheel, sweating, gripping it as if it was the only thing tethering me to reality. I couldn't stop, couldn't scream. Then, the figure whispered, its voice raspy and faint, repeating over and over, "You'll never leave. You'll never leave." The words grew louder, echoing in my mind until they were all I could hear. Desperate, I glanced at the dashboard. The clock read 1:42 a.m., the same time as when I first saw that phantom car. Felt like time had looped, trapping me in a nightmare. Finally, unable to take it anymore, I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop. I threw open the door and stumbled out, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. I looked back at the car, expecting to see the figure still sitting there, but it was empty. I stood there, panting, as the silence of the night pressed in around me. The road was empty again, no figures, no whispers, just quiet highway bathed in moonlight. I got back in the car, hands shaking, and drove away, refusing to look in the mirrors, focusing only on the horizon, hoping that I'd find my way out. As dawn finally broke and the first rays of sunlight pierced the trees, I felt a wave of relief, believing the nightmare was over. But when I pulled up to my driveway and glanced at the clock, it still read 1:42 a.m. I'd been on the road for hours, way past midnight, on a nearly deserted highway surrounded by dense woods, with no radio signal or GPS, just miles of dark road stretching endlessly in front of me. The silence was pressing, broken only by the hum of the engine and the faint crackle of gravel under my tires. As my eyes grew heavy, I noticed a hitchhiker standing by the side of the road, right by the mile marker. Normally, I wouldn't stop, but something about them made me hesitate. They stood so still, like they'd been waiting for hours, facing the car without moving. I passed quickly, but unease crept over me, and I drove faster, telling myself it was just exhaustion. Then, not even a mile later, I saw another hitchhiker, the same dark coat and stillness, standing exactly the same as the first. My pulse quickened. There's no way they could have moved that fast. I hadn't seen a single car, and there were no side roads for miles. I gripped the wheel tighter, ignoring them and pushing forward, but soon enough, there they were again, now a little closer, their face turned toward the car. My stomach dropped as I passed, glancing in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing, just empty road and darkness. I tried to rationalize it, but the tension in my chest was undeniable. As I rounded a curve, I saw them again, standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding as I came to a screeching halt. The figure was closer now, staring at me with eyes that were too dark, too focused. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, until they began to walk around the car, gliding almost until they were right outside my window, leaning in with their face pressed to the glass, eyes locked with mine. A whisper filled the car. Going somewhere? My heart raced, and I froze, unable to move or breathe. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they backed away, fading into the darkness. I didn't wait. I sped off, hands trembling, desperate to escape. But the relief was short-lived. Every time I thought I was alone, I saw something in the shadows. Figures by the trees, faces reflected in the mirrors, always watching, waiting. No matter how fast I drove, they were there, closing in. My gas gauge dipped lower and panic set in. Then, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror, and for a brief moment, I felt relief. But as the car got closer, I noticed the strange dimness of the headlights, and it stayed right behind me, matching my speed. I slowed, hoping they'd pass, but they stayed glued to my bumper. The headlights flickered unnaturally, and then, suddenly, the car blared its horn, a deafening scream that cut through the night. I jumped, my heart racing, and in an instant, the headlights blinked out, leaving me in pitch-black darkness. Panic surged. I sped forward, desperate to escape, but as I did, I saw the figure again. This time, standing in the middle of the road, and behind them hundreds of identical figures, lined up along the road as far as I could see, all perfectly still, watching me. I swerved, barely missing them, but even as I sped away, I could feel their eyes on me, tracking my every move. I didn't stop until I reached the lights of a town and pulled into the nearest gas station, my heart racing and mind reeling. I stumbled inside, gasping for air, too terrified to speak. The attendant stared at me, but I couldn't find the words to explain. I grabbed my coffee and glanced out the window, half expecting to see those figures waiting in the shadows, but the lot was empty, and the night was still. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that they're out there, somewhere watching me, and every time I drive that road, I pray I'll be alone, because if I ever see them again, I don't think I'll make it back. It was supposed to be an ordinary drive, a late-night trip from my friend's place back home, a straight shot down an old, mostly empty highway. But as I drove farther, everything grew eerily quiet, and the cars became fewer until it was just me, the darkness, and the long stretch of road. The clock on my dash read 2:13 a.m., and my eyes strained from staring at the road so long. My headlights cut a narrow path through the darkness, the tall trees lining the highway casting shadows that reached out like skeletal arms. Something about the night felt wrong. A thick fog seemed to follow my car, swallowing everything in my wake. The radio was static, the GPS had lost signal, and my phone had died an hour ago. I was exhausted, ready to dismiss the strange atmosphere, when a flicker in the rearview mirror caught my eye, a figure on the side of the road, just at the edge of the fog. But when I looked back, they were gone. Just emptiness. My mind played tricks, I thought, but it happened again, this time closer, as though the figure was catching up. My heart raced, and I pressed the gas, but the figure kept pace, getting clearer each time. It moved strangely, almost as if dragged by some invisible force. Every glance back revealed it was closer. I sped up, but the figure closed in. Ahead, My headlights hit a shape on the road. It wasn't an animal. It was a man, hunched and staring, his eyes reflecting the light in a disturbingly dead way. I swerved to avoid him, nearly losing control, but when I looked back, he had vanished, though the figure behind me hadn't. It was now so close I could make out its face, my face. It stared at me with hollow eyes and an empty, twisted expression. I gripped the wheel, frozen. As its mouth opened in an inhuman smile, black liquid spilling from the corners. Then it spoke, but the sound was more like nails on a chalkboard, a garbled static filling the car. "Don't look away," it whispered in my own voice. I slammed on the gas, driving faster, the fog thickening until the outside world became a void. I drove for what felt like hours, the figure keeping pace beside me, its face pressed against the passenger window with that impossible grin. And then the fog cleared. The road was empty again, and a familiar sign appeared, the exit to my town. I took the exit, not questioning anything, and drove straight home. Pulling into my driveway, I stumbled out of the car, heart pounding, legs shaking. Inside, I locked the door and tried to tell myself it was over. But as I glanced out the window, my heart stopped. There, at the end of the driveway, was the figure, its eyes meeting mine through the glass, the twisted smile spreading across its face once more, before it disappeared. It started as just a regular late-night drive home after another overtime shift. The familiar route wound through quiet country roads cloaked in a darkness that felt unusually thick, clinging to my car and swallowing everything beyond my headlights. The road stretched on, lined with tall, looming trees that formed a tunnel around me, and aside from the soft hum of the engine, the silence was unnerving. Then, out of nowhere, a figure appeared on the side of the road, a person standing still with their back turned. My heart skipped, but I rationalized it was just a late-night passerby and kept driving. When I checked my rearview mirror, they were gone. Brushing it off, I continued, only to see the same figure reappear further down the road, still facing away, each sighting closer than the last, creeping toward the center of the road. The air grew thick with dread as I kept driving, gripping the wheel, feeling like the road itself was some endless trap. The figure appeared closer each time until they were right behind my car, vanishing before I could even react. Just as my heart began to settle, the headlights flickered and a scratching sound echoed around me. Panic surged when the lights blinked out completely, and for a moment, I was enveloped in pitch-black silence. When they flickered back on, the figure was sitting beside me in the passenger seat, their skin pale and tight, a twisted smile stretched across their dry, cracked lips. "Where are you going?" they whispered, their voice slicing through the quiet. I couldn't speak, paralyzed with fear, but managed to press the gas, desperate to get away. The scratching grew louder, frantic, coming from every direction. I could feel them watching, waiting, their eyes boring into the side of my head, and I fought the urge to look, focusing only on reaching the faint glimmer of lights from my town. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I stumbled inside, locking the door, heart pounding. I was safe. But then, from the other side of the door, I heard the faint scratching and a soft whisper, "You can't run forever." Since then, I haven't taken that road, but on some nights, the scratching returns, faint yet persistent, a chilling reminder that no matter where I go, they are never far behind.